Stained. I muttered a quick curse to myself and then stooped to pick up the CD that had fallen out of my hand and onto the rough carpet. Haley laughed at me, then took a step forward and looked at the player. Kind of an old thing, huh? I mean, I don't know the last time I saw a boombox. What CD do you have there anyway? I responded that it was a Counting Crows CD from 1993, which made her laugh again. An old album for an old setup? Are you kidding me? I explained to her that it was a new hobby, that physical media was a dying art form, and I was doing my best to keep it alive in my home. She didn't think that was too impressive. I placed the CD into the player and kicked it into gear, music filling the space around us. Haley was smiling as she walked over to the couch in my studio apartment. She had known me for some time, and I knew she was just teasing, but I was exasperated regardless. So anyway, Gary, I wanted to hang out for a reason. See, I have an announcement. I haven't told anyone yet, but I wanted to run it by you first. I nodded and laced my fingers together, then stared ominously into her eyes. They were wonderful eyes, green at the center and fading out to blue as they got away from the pupil. She had long black hair, a round face, and an eyebrow piercing over her left eye that I had always been a little jealous of. Okay, let's hear it, I said, to which she quieted down, took a deep breath, and said, I am moving. There is a residency for a journalist in Ireland, and I'm taking it. I'll be living in a town called Clifton, on the west coast of the island. It's a permanent position. I sat back and sighed. Well then shit, I'm going with you. You know how I feel about Ireland. I have a fucking tattoo from one of their myths. Haley stared back at me. Gary, you can't. There's no fucking way. You need a visa and a bunch of money. You barely make rent on your shitty apartment, and you can't come with. But I can pay for you to help me move through the company. You'd get free flights and a week's stay, fly in and out of Galway, and meals would be covered as a moving expense. I was dumbfounded. Yeah, I recognized that moving there with Haley wasn't possible, but a free vacation in one of my most admired countries? I was all in. Deal, I said. 2 months later, we arrived in Galway. We rented a car and Haley drove us west. I will admit I was wanting to head north to Northern Ireland, where Cuchulainn had defended Ulster. It was a bit odd to be going to the opposite end of that particular battle, to the land Queen Maeve had realized her husband was a bull wealthier than her. Still, I gazed out the window dreamily, rolling hills of green pasture running by the window. I saw beyond the horizon a boat then, though surely we were in the midst of the island. 3 prominent masts with sails undone reaching for the sky. The men on the boat were all clean-shaven and seemed too small for their armor that hearkened to a more ancient age. I shook my head and the sight disappeared. I told Haley about it, and she replied that I shouldn't eat any more mushrooms that I found on the ground. Clifton was a gorgeous town, nestled quietly against the Atlantic. We rolled in and passed an airport which got Haley muttering about, why didn't we just fly right here? While I saw only run-down biplanes and a torn-up runway. We got to the home where Haley would be living and I'd be staying. It was a 2-story home, kitchen, living room, bathroom, hallway, sunroom, and 1 guest room forming the downstairs. 2 bedrooms and a study comprising the upper. I threw my bag into the guest room, then walked around. The kitchen nice and quaint. The living room bare and devoid of furniture or even a television. The bathroom clean as a whistle, but very cramped. The sun absolutely beautiful, though it was cloudy that day. Upstairs was much different. The stairs creaked as I ascended. There, the bedrooms were bare as the living room. It was when I went into the study that I felt something was off. I heard muttering and looked around for any speakers, not recognizing the voice as Haley's. I believe she was downstairs anyway at this moment. I went to the window finally and pulled it open. There, just beside the wall of the home, was a couple arguing. The woman had rags on and was eating a sandwich while she cursed at the man, who was wearing a fine peacoat and bearing the brunt of the woman's assault. Eventually, she took a bite of her sandwich and the man reached up and grabbed her left eye, pulling it from her head. The woman stopped chewing and spat her bite out at the man, then tossed the sandwich at him and grabbed her eye. She dusted it off on her rags, then tossed it into the dirt, where it suddenly grew into a yew tree. She laughed, flipped the man the bird, then began climbing the tree as it grew taller and taller. Before I knew it, she had disappeared into the canopy of the tree, and the man was left shaking his head. Then he vanished quite suddenly, leaving behind just a lonely old sandwich beneath a lonely new yew tree. I decided not to tell Haley this time, and wandered on downstairs. She was in the living room looking out the front window. I approached and asked her what was on her mind. I'm not entirely sure. My shipment of cargo doesn't get here until tomorrow, so we kind of have to just exist in this space. Would you like to take advantage of the company funding and go and grab a fancy dinner? I nodded that I absolutely would, then retreated to the guest room to change into a button-up shirt. I am not an attractive man. I have a long face and prominent nose, gray eyes that feel soulless. I am lanky somehow, even though I measure 5.5 feet tall, and my brown hair always appears unbrushed. But a nice choice of black slacks and a shirt with beautiful roses decorating it made me feel a bit more confident. Haley stepped out wearing a black dress and short heels that looked fantastic. She herself was a bit more attractive than I, her brilliant eyes doing lots of favors for an average face and potentially too slim figure. I did learn not to comment on her appearance early in our friendship, however, so I kept these observances to myself. We looked quite dashing tonight, and so we stepped out and got to the car before realizing we had no idea where to go. I looked back at the home and saw a yew tree in the front yard. No woman in sight and no more sandwich on the ground. Haley started driving and mumbled to me, "Where the fuck we going, Gary? You think there's even a fancy restaurant in this town?" Gotta be a steak place at least, right? I could also go for fish. We're on the ocean, so how could there not be fresh fish? As we drove into town, I noticed the church looming over the rest of the buildings. While the town kept modest homes and businesses, the church was a spectacle, towering over everything from the end of the downtown strip. It rose to a spire so delicate it seemed a bird perching on it would cause it to collapse entirely. The main portion of the building had a large glass-stained window. Haley had picked out a steakhouse for us, but wanting to see the church a bit closer, I stepped towards it. The patterns in the stained glass became images. I'd expected a blood-stained Jesus and a Mother Mary, but soon I noticed the images depicted were all of children, specifically children missing legs and arms. Some were depicted as freshly amputated and bloody, others as healed and adjusted to. Haley called for me then, and I turned from the church, understanding not quite making its way to my thought process. The steakhouse was good. We finished eating and thanked the waitress, who had pinned us as Americans before we even spoke. She had been very kind, however, and told us of some activities to be done around town while we waited patiently for Haley's cargo. The one we were getting up to tonight was a walk along the beach at the shore. There was to be a fire tonight, and we would be arriving just as it was being lit. After we had parked and made our way down to the crashing waves, we saw a large crowd of people gathered in a bunched-together circle. We began to walk towards them, when suddenly a large plume of smoke rose from the center of the circle. Then within moments, orange and red licks of flame began to jump above the heads of the crowd. Haley and I smiled at each other, and were then greeted by the townsfolk, each one of them saying hi and hello and how are you, and introducing themselves with names I would never be able to spell. We settled in quite nicely as the crowd went back to gazing at the fire, folks spreading out and laying down blankets or setting up chairs to enjoy themselves. We stayed for 2 hours. When we left, it was dark, the night having descended upon the fire like crows to a carcass. Haley and I discussed how well that had gone as we walked back to the car. I placed my hands on the handle, then got the urge to turn. I looked back at the beach, barely in view, and saw every last person rising from their seats and walking into the water. I stared as they silently waded, getting deeper and deeper into the Atlantic waves. Haley did not see this and told me to get in the car. I did as I was told. That night, Haley stepped upstairs to sleep on the carpeted floor of her bedroom while I stayed downstairs to sleep on the hardwood floor of the guest room. After she had left me alone, I walked up to the living room and looked out at the window at the yew tree. It looked old at this point, gnarled and even a little rotten in places. I was expecting at least a squirrel to run up and down, but saw nothing, not even the ravens that were common throughout the town. Deciding that I was too curious, I walked outside and began to investigate the tree. It had struck me as odd that I hadn't noticed it yet Haley had no comments about its appearance. I knocked on it, hugged it, ran my hands over the bark, and even tried to climb it, though the lowest branches were too high for me. I heard the car start suddenly, the engine turning over, sounding through the night. I ran to the automobile, only to find the key in the ignition and the car on, but not a soul around. I sat in the driver's seat. I decided it wouldn't hurt if I took it for a little spin. I knew where I had to go, the church. It was pulling me with a strength I could not deny. So I drove through the downtown and parked right in front. I saw flickering lights behind the stained glass children, then approached and heard voices singing. I was not going to stay and find out why there were people in church in the middle of the night. I left immediately, but as I was heading back to the house, the steering wheel jerked from my hands and sent me careening down a side path. After a few more startling turns, I was at the ocean again, right where we had seen the bonfire. Only now, there was nobody here, and just a smoldering remnant of the flames left to remind me of the relaxing time we had had that evening. I got out of the car and walked towards the fire. I had barely gone anywhere when suddenly the water lapped at my feet. I walked away from it, but found I could not direct my body in any direction other than the waves. Soon I found myself up to my knees. Next, I was up to my hips. Suddenly, there was a crowd forming on the beach, each of the townsfolk standing and watching my passage. I looked back at them as the water rose above my waist. They were adorned with beautiful robes. Some wore sashes of varying colors, and when they noticed me looking, they began to chant. I was up to my shoulders now, listening as the sound of the ocean began to overtake their chants. I forced my body to stop as the waves began to hit my chin, sheer willpower fighting this terrible force. It was with a quick burst that something wrapped around my legs and dragged me under the water. I fought for my breath but could do nothing. I wondered about Haley and what she would remember of me. Then, as bubbles erupted from my mouth, I was pulled into the inky blackness, only to hear the chants of the people of Clifton grow louder while the world around me faded.